So if you've been watching the breakthroughs in generative AI, and I mean the photorealistic images, the absolutely stunning
Us,
video.
the jaw-dropping fidelity, really, it's on another level.
Exactly. What you're looking at is the peak performance of a technology called the diffusion model. But that name, diffusion model, it feels a little too simple, doesn't it?
It really does. It kind of suggests this magical noise reduction, but the reality is that it's a deeply engineered system, and it's undergone a complete revolution in just the last couple of years.
That's what I'm getting at. The engines behind things like Stable Diffusion 3 or these huge new frameworks, they aren't the same algorithms we were looking at in, say, 2021.
Not at all. We're looking at a complete architectural shift. So for our deep dive today, our mission is to peel back those layers. We're going to analyze the modern standard, the flow-based diffusion transformer, or DIT.
Okay, so we'll dissect the core principles and really get into the innovations that made these models so scalable, so fast, and, finally controllable.
Exactly.
All right, so let's try to unpack this step by step for you, our listener. At its heart, any diffusion model, new or old, is all about reversing a two-part process.
And it all relies on mathematical stability. The first part, the forward process, is actually beautifully simple.
Right.
You take a perfectly clean data sample. Let's imagine, I don't know, a hyper-detailed photo of a samurai standing over a neon cityscape.
Okay, got it. A complex image.
And you gradually and systematically corrupt it. You add what's called Gaussian noise step by step until that amazing image is just pure, meaningless static.
Okay, that part's easy enough to understand. But the challenge, and I guess the whole point of the model, is the reverse process.
That's the magic. That's the generation phase. This is where the model has to learn the exact mathematical path. It's a differential equation, really, to travel backward.
To turn that static back into the samurai.
Precisely. And how it learns that reversal, that's where all the evolution has happened. You see, early diffusion models were all trained on something called noise prediction.
Noise prediction. So they were trying to predict the exact static that needed to be subtracted at each step to get a little bit closer to the clean image.
You got it. But think about the problem there. Let's say the generation is almost finished, right? The signal, the clean image, is really strong, and the noise level is super low.
Okay, so trying to predict that tiny remaining bit of noise would be, really unstable.
You've hit on the critical weakness, exactly. When the image is, say, 95% complete, the model is super confident about the data, the $6, but the target noise is minuscule. If it makes even a tiny error in guessing that little bit of noise,
Those errors would just pile up.
they accumulate rapidly, and you see them as artifacts in the final image. The whole thing just becomes numerically shaky.
So they needed a more stable target to aim for.
Yeah.
And that's what led to this idea of flow matching and velocity.
Precisely. This shift stabilizes the math completely. Instead of predicting a fluctuating amount of noise, modern DMs, especially those using rectified flow, predict the velocity or sometimes even the final clean data itself.
Velocity prediction. Can you explain that?
Yeah.
How does defining a flow make this whole problem easier?
It creates this really elegant conceptual path. So flow matching defines a perfect linear path, a straight line that connects a pure noise to the clean data.
A straight line.
Yep. And if you trace that straight line over time, the ideal path has a constant, easily predictable velocity.
So the model isn't just randomly guessing a direction in some crazy high-dimensional space. It's just trying to predict the speed and direction needed to move along this predefined highway from noise to the final image.
That is the perfect analogy. The training objective, what's called the conditional flow matching loss, it literally just tells the model to match its predicted velocity to that true constant velocity. We replaced shaky guesswork with a robust physics-based problem.
And that stability is why modern models can generate images in so fewer steps with higher fidelity.
That's the key.
I see. So if flow matching solved the math problem, you still need an engine that can actually run this at a massive scale. Which brings us to the big architectural upgrade. The shift from the old UNet to the diffusion transformer, or DIT. What was so wrong with the UNet?
The UNet was a workhorse, a powerhouse for its time, but it was designed to operate in pixel space, processing images layer by layer. It struggled with the kind of massive parallel computation and scalability that modern AI demands.
So the DIT just throws that whole paradigm out. It sees the image completely differently.
Totally. It treats the compressed image data, the latent representation, not as a grid of pixels, but as a sequence of discrete tokens, or patches.
This will look like a photograph or a sentence made up of little image chunks.
Exactly. And by adopting the transformer framework, the DIT immediately gets all the efficiency and scalability that we've seen proven by large language models.
So just so I'm clear, the DIT is using the same fundamental engine that lets something like ChatGPT process millions of words, but it's applying it to image tokens instead.
That's the core idea, and this is where it gets really, really interesting. Because the scaling laws that apply to LLMs also apply here, but with a surprising twist.
Oh.
Architectures like FlagDT, the ones used in Lumina T2X, they demonstrated this shocking phenomenon. Increasing the model size, and we're talking up to 7 billion parameters, actually accelerates convergence.
Wait, hang on. Making it bigger makes it faster to train to a certain quality level. I mean, that just contradicts decades of engineering intuition. Why would a bigger, more complex model be more efficient?
It is totally counterintuitive, but the data is crystal clear. The larger models are just better at capturing complex details and dependencies much more quickly, so they need fewer training steps to get to a high performance level.
So for you, the listener, this means what? That training a huge model, while expensive up front, is actually more compute efficient in the long run.
Per sample, yes, the efficiency gain can be enormous. A large DIT might hit a target quality in half the training time of a model that's a tenth of its size. So scaling isn't just about making them better, it's about making the whole training process more efficient.
That's a huge shift in thinking. And speaking of scaling, Lumina T2X took this DIT engine and made it into a unified framework, right? The T2X concept.
Yeah.
How do they get it to handle text, images, videos, even 3D without breaking the architecture?
They kept the transformer's one-dimensional sequence structure, but they use these special learnable tokens to define the context. So if it's an image, they might use a next-line token to signal a change in aspect ratio.
And for a video?
For a video, they introduce a next-frame token. The transformer just learns that when it sees that token, everything that follows belongs to the next moment in time. It's a really elegant hack to manage all this different data in a standard architecture.
But these models are huge. Dealing with billions of parameters, mixed precision training, that sounds like a numerical nightmare. Did they need to borrow some stability tricks from the LLM world to stop them from just collapsing during training?
Oh, absolutely. The stability of these huge FlagDT models really hangs on 3 key modifications that LLM researchers perfected. First, they replaced standard layer normalization with RMS norm. It's just more stable.
Okay.
Second, they added something called key query normalization, or KQ norm.
Hold on, let's define that. What does KQ norm actually do? Is it like regulating the strength of the attention scores?
That's precisely right. In a transformer, the self-attention mechanism computes these scores, or logits, that decide how much attention one token pays to another. If those scores get too big, the training can just diverge, the loss explodes, and the model breaks.
So KQ norm keeps them in a stable range.
It actively controls and normalizes them. It's absolutely critical when you're training a 7 billion parameter model with faster, lower precision data types.
It's a traffic cop for the attention mechanism.
Yeah.
I get it. And the third trick?
The third was swapping out standard absolute positional embedding for rotary position embedding, or ROPE. Since the DIT is all about sequences of tokens, ROPE is essential for handling different resolutions flexibly. It doesn't hard code positions, it rotates them.
And that flexibility is what gives us that free lunch concept we'll get to later.
Yeah.
But for now, let's pivot to the 2 other massive challenges: the speed problem and the control problem. Let's start with speed.
The speed problem was the great wall for early DMs. To get one high-quality image, you might need thousands of sequential model evaluations. We call them NFEs.
Thousands. So if you wanted a picture of a whimsical waffle-eating hippopotamus, you'd be sitting there for hours.
Potentially, yeah. It was painfully slow.
So how do you leap from 1,000 steps to something that runs in, like, 10 seconds?
Through advanced numerical methods,
Okay.
basically adapting decades of research on solving differential equations. You can think of the old methods as walking across the country one step at a time. Modern solvers, like the flow DPM solver used in models like Sana, are the equivalent of taking a short-haul flight. They let the process skip huge sections while keeping the accuracy.
So they're just way more efficient at picking the next critical point along that flow path.
Exactly. We're now talking about stable, high-quality generation in just 10 to 20 NFEs. That's a massive reduction from the 30 to 50 needed by more basic solvers, let alone the original 1,000.
The speed is up, but now size is the issue. If I want a truly massive 4K image, the number of tokens the transformer has to deal with just explodes. The memory requirements must be Insane.
Debilitating. And that's where you see these specialized, efficiency-focused models like Sana come in. They attack that token explosion with deep compression.
Yeah, compression.
Yeah, Sana uses a specialized autoencoder, the AEF32, that compresses the image data not by the standard 8 times, but by an aggressive factor of 32 times.
Wow, 32x. That must be hard to do without losing all the detail. What's the payoff for the transformer?
It's twofold: memory and speed. That aggressive 32x compression cuts the number of latent tokens the transformer sees by 16 times compared to standard compression. That's the only way you can generate 4K images on reasonable hardware.
And I think I remember the second speed innovation tackled the self-attention bottleneck in the original transformer, right?
Yes. The original DDIT used quadratic self-attention. The cost scales with the square of the number of tokens. At 4K resolution, that's just a killer. So Sana replaced it with linear attention.
And that just changes the complexity from square to linear.
From out to linear.
Yeah.
So instead of the cost skyrocketing with resolution, it just grows proportionally. At 124 by 1024, for example, linear attention gave them a throughput boost of up to 39 times. It's proof that it's not just about size, architectural efficiency is king.
Okay, speed solved. Now the second great challenge, control. You have these lightning-fast models, but how do you get them to create something incredibly specific, like an old, rusted robot wearing a futuristic jacket skiing in a neon supermarket?
The foundation for that is still classifier-free guidance, or CFG. It's a simple, elegant trick that makes all this possible. The model is trained on both your specific text prompt, the conditional input, and a null, empty prompt, the unconditional.
And during generation, it, plays them off each other?
Precisely. The model looks at the direction the conditional prompt is pushing it, compares that to the unconditional path, and then it just extrapolates. It exaggerates the difference, basically amplifying your prompt signal and forcing the output to stick much closer to your skiing robot.
And the part that understands that complex prompt, the text encoder, that must have gotten a huge upgrade too. They're not using old stuff like T5 anymore.
Not at all. Modern models use sophisticated decoder-only large language models, versions of Gemma or Llama as their text encoders. These LMs just have so much more world knowledge and reasoning ability.
Which allows them to do things like complex human instructions, or CHI. That sounds like some next-level prompt engineering.
It is, but the model does the heavy lifting for you. CHI uses the LLM's own reasoning to internally refine a simple prompt. So you might type a cat in a garden.
Okay.
And the LLM internally rewrites that before diffusion even starts into something like a small, fluffy calico cat curled up in a sun-drenched patch of vivid green grass surrounded by blooming lavender. It just gives the diffusion model a much better, much richer target to aim for.
That's a great practical innovation. Okay, finally, let's circle back to that architectural flexibility. The free lunch resolution extrapolation. How does that work?
It's a direct, powerful side effect of using ROPE and those special next-line tokens we talked about. Because the DIT sees data as a flexible sequence and ROPE doesn't have fixed positions, a model trained at 1K resolution can generate images at resolutions it has never seen.
Like 1.5K or 1.7K.
Exactly, just by injecting more next-line tokens during generation.
And the truly mind-bending part is that this can sometimes actually improve the image quality. Like the bigger canvas lets the model sort out details better.
It can, though there are limits. You can't just go from 1K training straight to 2K output without some artifacts. But the flexibility it offers is just a testament to the power of the transformer architecture.
So what does this all mean for you, the person using this technology? I mean, we've just walked through a total overhaul of the generative AI engine. We went from slow pixel space UNets doing shaky noise prediction
To super fast latent space diffusion transformers doing stable velocity prediction. Add in deep compression, linear attention, and advanced solvers, and you've tackled the speed problem.
And with things like CFG and complex human instructions, the control problem is becoming more and more manageable.
The key takeaway really is efficiency over brute force. Yes, bigger models converge faster and have higher quality, but it's the architectural cleverness that makes them accessible. A tiny model like Sana.6b can get competitive results with, 39 times faster throughput.
We're moving to a future where generating a high-quality 4K image in seconds on your own computer is just standard.
That's the trajectory.
So if the computational hurdles are being cleared, and these architectural tricks are making massive models accessible, here's a thought for you to mull over. If size and speed are no longer the main roadblocks, where does the next great leap in generative AI performance come from? Will it be another total paradigm shift in architecture, or will the quality of the data we feed these incredibly sophisticated engines finally become the one true limiting factor?